I want to welcome Heather Melville, OBE, to the stage. She joined PwC in November 2018 following a successful 37-year career, mainly in financial services and international sales. Last 17 years focused around international trade, and most recently a role as Director of Strategic Partnerships and Head of Business Inclusion at the RBS. In 2017, Heather was awarded an OBE for her services to gender equality in business, and her passion for inclusion has led to myriad awards, named in the 2016 and 2017 Financial Times list of 100 top UK and US BAME leaders, and the publications 2017 and 2018 Heroes, Champions of Women in Business. She has been named by Powerlist as one of the UK's most influential black people and in the top 30 most influential black people in the City of London. Heather, welcome. It's fantastic to have you here, and thanks a million to Priscilla for the introduction. Today we're all about practical solutions and strategies, but just before that, I mean, I know I read out some of your accolades, but I'd really love if you told us a little bit, and it's going to have to be a potted history, obviously, of your journey, and I suppose the kind of lessons you learned and the kind of lessons maybe the people who you worked with learned.
So first of all, I always feel like a fraud. When I hear that whole list of things, I think, is that really me? And then I go back to perhaps those 40 or 50 years ago when my parents came over from the Caribbean and rented a room, and I think to myself, I'm sad that they're not here today to see who I am and actually what we're doing, what we're contributing back, because I think it's really a sense of pride that they feel. So I was born in the 60s, so I'm a 60s baby, and actually there's a part of me that's always been, my father called it being stubborn. I call it being creative as I've got older, and my coach once said to me, actually, stubborn is a great passion to have. It means you care about something and that you'll argue the way. In fact, my father thought I should become a lawyer. My skills would be best used there. But I think growing up, I've never let my gender, my colour, anything stop me from doing what I wanted to do. And I think that's a great tribute to my parents for bringing all myself and my siblings up in an environment that really encouraged us to be the best that we could be. So I think your home life is really important. I think being able to see role models in our sitting room at home. My sister's a stockbroker. The picture of her graduation was always there. My mum always reminded myself and my sister to go and look at her. That's what you can become. So once again, that's about role models. I can't say that at this age I appreciated it at that age, because it was more about telling me what I should be. Bear in mind I said a bit about being stubborn. But having that role model of somebody who'd achieved something despite everything else around her always encouraged me. And then I think going into the world of work, I've been quite fortunate actually, that people who I started off my working career, including bosses that I'd worked for, are still in my life today. Next year, this year, I actually celebrate the best part of almost 40 years being in the city. And I've been very fortunate that some of those people are still in my life in terms of sponsoring, mentoring me, befriending me, encouraging me. And actually, when I've doubted whether I could do something, they've always reminded me how I have and how I can. So I think that's something else that as employers and people of businesses and role models, which most of you are in this room, that you realise the impact you can have, not only on your family members, but also on people that work for you.
I love it. And, you know, were there people in particular? You know, I remember you telling me a story about one boss you went in when you were looking for a job, and you went in and sat in front of him, and he didn't think you were going to be right for the job, am I right?
So this goes back many, many years ago, many years, 30 plus years ago. And I can remember going for an interview at an Arab bank. That's what I'll say at the moment. And the gentleman actually said to me, I don't, which is 30 years ago, so he'd obviously be fired if he said it now, I don't think that women with children should work. They should stay at home. Which was a great opening, I have to tell you. So I listened to him, and then I decided I didn't really want to work for him, so I'm going to give him whatever I've got, and I certainly did. And one of the things that I said to him is, actually, it doesn't matter whether you think women or not should work. I need to work, because my children are going to have the same opportunities as your children have had. I'm a single mother, and we've got a mortgage to pay. Your wife doesn't have to go to work, and that was the crux of the conversation that we had. Well, when I left, I was in that office with him for 2 hours, which as far as I was concerned, was an awful situation for both of us. And his PA stopped me and she said, "Oh my God, you've got the job." And I went, "I don't think so." And I went home. And then the agency called me and they said, "How did it go?" I said, "It was awful. He was pompous, he was rude. Do you want to know how it went for him?" And I said, "Nope, I'm not going to work there." She said, "Well, let me tell you the feedback." And I've always remembered this. He said, "I'm going to hire that woman and I'm going to bring her in to do a job I haven't quite created as yet. And we're talking about 20 odd years ago, nearly 30 years ago, and I'm going to pay her £3,000 more than what the original job that she came in for." And one of the things I realised after falling down off the floor and thinking this could not be the case, and thinking, how could I go and speak to this man after I've just told his PA that I wouldn't work for him, was it's about being authentic. Going into that room and being very honest in a respectful way gave us the great foundation to have an open and honest conversation. I had to work, I wanted to work. And actually those are the best people you want in your organisation, people who want to work and have got to work. Because when they're there, they're going to give you 10 times more than just the person that coasts along and they're coming to work as a hobby. So I think that was one of those. And I think the other example, which really was a big one for me, was many years ago I worked for IBM for a period of about 8 years, and it was really interesting. They approached me from me being at a conference. So there's something about how you're dressed and how you conduct yourself when you go to these things, because people are looking around, just as you are today looking at potential talent outside in that room. Anyway, they invited me to come along for an interview, and in true style, big corporate, they had a huge table with about 8 people, all men, and little me. And in my head, I kept thinking to myself, oh my God, this is where I'm going to really have to become an actress now. I'm not going to allow them to intimidate me. I've got a job, actually, and a job that I'm really happy in. And the question that they started off with was, "So why would you like to come and work for IBM?" And this person on my shoulder just said, "Just tell them that you don't have to come and work here." So I said, I didn't quite put it that way, but I said, actually, I'm really happy where I am, so I think you should explain to me why I should leave my job and come and work for you. What that did, it gave me time to think about whatever else they were going to throw back at me. And actually, as I've learned, once again in that situation, being open and honest, they apologised straight away, and they started spewing out all the things, all the answers I possibly could have needed to regurgitate and play back to them. And I learned as a skill at that point the art of listening and being able to ask questions. And I think you need those skills throughout all of your career, irrespective of what your background is and irrespective of what job you're going for.
So, I mean, you have a background in financial services, you've worked for IBM as well, and you're now with PwC, but it is a bit like our area, which is STEM, you know, science, technology, engineering and maths. Financial services, why, if we have 55% young, brilliant women in next door, why are we still at, you know, in technical roles, 10% women, and in financial services, I don't know what the figures are. What are organisations getting wrong?
I really think, and I can speak from the heart here, is that the people that are in this room really care about it, right? But you're not always the people that do the hiring. And you're not always the people that have the conversations. And there's a disconnect between the people walking through the rooms outside and the people that sit in this room. And I think the real passion for me is when you see someone quite talented come from nowhere and is on the television, or they've created something, you think, oh my God, I was at an event and I met that person. And I think really and truly there is something around really challenging back internally to look at what role models do we have. Actually, what is a role model? And as I said to you, everyone that's in this room is a role model, and you'll all know other role models because you're all doing great jobs at some point. But how do you get that back to the children who are in school? And if I talk about particularly young women, 51% of the women here, 55 who have enrolled to be here are female, right? But yet still, when they go through university, they fall off, and then when they come into the workplace, once again, they don't stay. And yet still, STEM is such an important subject to us. So there is something around us going out into schools, events like this, where you've got people talking about their careers, letting people see, actually, irrespective of my background, I can see myself doing that role. I can see myself in that organisation. I want to go and talk to that person. And what I often say to young people when I speak to them is, We've all got egos in organisations. We all have egos. We've got these fantastic jobs and these badge of honours that we walk around. Just approach them and ask them, please tell me about how you got into that role. Tell me what your lessons are, what you learned. Link in with somebody. Tell them that you've seen them speak at something, but start that broach of conversations. 99% of the people in this room will respond. We're all very busy people, but actually it's somebody that's interested in us, and most importantly, they're interested in the company that you work for. So if I think about my role I'm doing at the moment, they found me on LinkedIn. Right, that's how they did their homework. So when organisations are saying, we don't know where to find BME talent, we don't know where to find women, we don't know where to find people over the age of 50 that might want to have a different career, actually LinkedIn is that tool that people are using more and more. So I would once again encourage organisations to put the great stuff that they're doing on those social media platforms, and also to encourage them to really just go and look. Challenge your HR people, challenge your business leaders. I work for a leader now who has made it quite clear that we want to change the makeup of our leadership team. So everybody needs to go and look for talent, and they need to go and look on LinkedIn. People's faces are, oh, and he's done it. And he's encouraging us to do it. So as a leader, it's about starting from the top, making it something that's part of your culture in the organisation.
One thing that I find quite often as well is that in organisations, often the pressure seems to fall on the minorities themselves. So it's kind of the responsibility of the women or the LGBTQ community to change the organisation. Have you come across that?
So absolutely. So I set up the network in my previous organisation, which was probably some 15 years ago at a time when we didn't want networks. But what absolutely allowed me to happen, and somebody who's in that organisation today was my sponsor, who encouraged me and said, Heather, make this happen. I'll give you whatever funding you need, just don't tell anybody that I did it. So I'm not going to say who he was, but he's one of my sponsors today, even though I've left. And the whole thing around, for me, it's about equality and the opportunity. When I worked at IBM, I saw women that looked like myself. I saw people that looked like myself in senior roles. And I saw the way that they came into the organisation. They had really strong networks. And when I joined my last organisation, we didn't have any. So I decided to set up a network and base it around the core values of our organisation, the business values. So nobody could say this was a nice little social networking group. Somebody did make a comment about, is this about women knitting and whatever, and burning their bras, and I said, actually, the women I know, they don't wear bras, so you might as well just take that out of the equation. But on a serious note, linking it to the business objectives made it such a powerful tool that it then engaged all of the execs and engaged our colleagues. And for me, one of the things, particularly when you talk about gender, and I'll talk about gender because that's the big one everyone is really thinking about, is that the way to really make it effective is to engage some of the men as change makers. Because at the helm of most organisations, we still have a majority of men. And actually what happens is those men start to think about their daughters, their sisters, their wives coming back into the workplace, particularly their daughters that they've spent a lot of money and time on their education. They want them to come into the workplace and have a fair opportunity of having a great job. And I think actually you have to make this as something that's part of the business agenda, not something as that's a tick box, that's a CSR piece. It's not. And then when you start to look at your customer base, because your customers are the driving force for the success of the future. So if you're not really listening to your customers and you're going into pitches, particularly pitches with all male sales campaigns, guess what? They're sitting there thinking they've lost this before they've even started the conversation. So, and I've been on the other side where I've heard people say that. So we better beware and think that actually if you want to have a successful business, you need to start thinking about the population of the communities that you serve. And I think it's pretty clear what I'm trying to say there, right? They need to look diverse.
Yeah, it was funny, and I came across it a lot traveling in the States, organisations that will not work with suppliers that do not have some level of diversity in their leadership. And I think we're going to see that more and more and more. So I think for small companies as well, it's really important that they realise it affects them too. Yeah.
Well, I'm 9 weeks out of leaving my other organisation that's part of my family. I've been there for 17 years, but I can proudly say that 3 or 4 years ago, we got one of our first investors that picked us because of our gender policy. So I think that in itself is a real life story of your investors looking at you and deciding whether or not they will invest in you or do business with your company based on some of the things that you're doing in this space.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of that. We've got an audience, an extra audience actually. I love the energy around this place at the moment. It's great. I want to invite up our other panellists now shortly as well. But one thing I just want to pull out of what she said there, you mentioned sponsor, and I'm really glad you used the word sponsor. One thing you and I agree very firmly on, I think, is this idea, and we've spoken about it in the past, is that idea that women and minorities don't need to be fixed. Thank you very much.
Right. 100% we don't. I don't need to be fixed.
I definitely don't need fixing, thank you. But rather that the system does. So it's getting, I suppose, leaders to realise that as well. I hear so much about mentorship programs and things like that, but I don't need a mentor. I need a sponsor, somebody who will invest in me, empower me. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
So I think there's two stages to that, and I don't mean to demean the word mentor. I think it's a really important program, but it's not the only thing, right?
I'm
so
being a bit harsh as well.
Having a coffee chat with somebody about their career once a year or so is not enough to help somebody on that journey. So those of us who say, actually, I am helping somebody, I've had a coffee with person A or B, you're not being a mentor. It takes more than that. It really is about understanding the individual. And for me, I always say to people, you can't force somebody to be a mentor to someone, because you have to have a relationship, and that relationship needs to be built on respect and trust. But that's the first level. Sponsorship is slightly different. Sponsorship is actually when you've really worked with somebody and got them to the point where their profile is quite increased, they're picking up projects, they feel empowered to pick up certain things that maybe others wouldn't do in the organisation. That showcases the individual in the organisation. Because the conversations that happen, and we all know around talent, don't normally involve the individual. It will be a room full of people saying, I think person A is really good at that. And it takes somebody courageous to say, actually that person is good because I know who they are. And I'm going to use this because particularly with Asian women, where they do not, and people from Afro-Caribbean backgrounds have been taught for many years, don't put your hand up and say that you're great and whatever. And so they don't, they sit quietly because our parents have taught us it's really important that you're grateful for this job that you're doing. So sit quietly, do the job and then go home, don't talk about it. Actually, sometimes those people are doing fantastic jobs, but nobody knows about it because they're not telling anybody. And they're dependent on a line manager, right, who may have their own reasons for not promoting that person, to do that. And so having a sponsor really does help focus the sponsor's mind, but also the individual, because a sponsor is putting their neck on the line to say, I believe in person A can do this. But the empowerment part behind that is somebody who's mentored that person, had a conversation, got to know about them, and it's a reciprocal relationship. And I think if you want to be one step further and do the whole reverse mentoring, that's another powerful tool. Because as I mentioned before, when you've got the CEOs and the CFOs and that C-suite up there who actually do not know what's going on the grassroots until they start to see numbers of their employees trickling to their competitors, then they wonder what's going wrong in our organisation. You'll only really get to the root of that when you're able to have reciprocal and reverse mentoring sessions with people where it's open, it's honest, because you want that verbatim, you want that rich content to understand what is going wrong in our organisation. And you can actually label it back to why wouldn't you stay or why would you go? And I think those are things that are quite important.
And am I right in saying you're involved in some reverse mentoring yourself?
I have. I've reverse mentored a number of CEOs in other organisations, my last organisation, and two that through my role as CMI Women. For me, it's been absolutely fantastic because I get to be the boss, or pretend to be the boss. But most importantly is that it's a really open relationship where they're asking me about what does it feel like to be a woman in the city, in the industry. And then they look at me and they say, Heather, what does it feel like to be a black woman? And I say, right, okay, so I can't change my gender and I can't change my colour, right? That's who I am. And my age, those are the factual things. But actually what I can do is share with you some of the experiences that I've had. Some of them have been amazing and some of them not so good. The ones that have not been so good, actually they've been the best learning curves I've had. So typically what I've done in organisations, when I've seen bad behaviour that I don't like, I think to myself, I need that content for my book. So you carry on with that bad behaviour because I need to write a fantastic book and I'll need this behaviour. And so that's how I program it in my head, so I don't internalise it. Because what we tend to do, particularly people from ethnic backgrounds or people from diverse backgrounds, you feel like you're on your own, and so you accept bad behaviour because you think it's a normal, and you don't want to talk about it, you don't want to complain. Going back to, you know, the words of our parents, it's about being really grateful that you've got this job and, you know, just sit quietly and put up with the abuse or whatever. Well, actually, those days are gone because people in organisations communicate. Social media is one way, but that's not the only way. People actually talk to each other. And if I think about particularly young people coming in, they are not standing for any nonsense. If I think back to the pay gap last year, the amount of young men who were not happy that their female colleagues were not being paid the same as them was quite interesting. We did a research on CMI, which is Chartered Management Institute, which actually, and people from universities were saying, actually, I wouldn't work for that organisation if they're not paying somebody equally. And the other side for me now is when I look at the age piece, sometimes in organisations we'll sit behind a table and we'll make a decision that people over 50, their careers are finished. And that's not just women, that's men as well, right? Well, actually, they're the richest source of content we could have in terms of their mentoring, supporting, and sharing and showcasing, sharing experiences with some of the younger talent coming in. And it's not just the technical things, it's resilience. You know, the best way for someone to really start their career off is knowing what resilience do I need to prepare myself for. And someone who's been through that can share that. So I think, you know, the whole thing around diversity right now, for me, is a really exciting time because people will decide whether they want to do business with you if you look diverse and your culture is diverse. The other thing is, and when we're all looking for talent, because actually we want to bring through some young talent, well, they'll decide whether they want to work based on the culture of your organisation. And if they're not coming to work for you, they're out there, they're starting to set up their own businesses, and some of them are even saying, I'm going to become a competitor to the person that I wanted to work for. And I mean, we might smile about that, but I see that happening so many times. I see so many young entrepreneurs come up with fantastic ideas. You're going to hear about two of them later on. But these are young, talented people that sometimes are in our organisations, but no one knows what they're doing. You know, when we have conversations with people at the year end about, well, tell me about the things you're doing, don't just make it about what you're doing in your job. Tell me about the things that are of interest to you. Because if I think about some of the things I've done in my career, 50% of it I've done outside of my day job because it's given me the experience and the exposure and the opportunity to learn new skills. And actually, 17 years in my other organisation kept me there that long when I only planned to go there for 2 years. So it's all about the opportunities that you create and the culture that you have that allows people to thrive.